Apple is one of the most recognizable companies in the world. Its market valuation is north of $1 trillion, and millions of its devices are in the hands of users from Acapulco to Zimbabwe. From the advent of the personal computer, to the dark days following Steve Jobs' ouster, to the unprecedented success of the iPhone, Apple has been revolutionizing consumer technology for decades. Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne founded Apple in the Jobs family garage in 1976. Shortly thereafter, Wayne sold off his 10% stake in the company, leaving just Jobs and Wozniak. Wozniak was the man behind Apple's first device, the Apple I, building the first version by hand using a wooden casing. It was far from the kind of computers we know and use today, and was designed as a kit computer that you would put together on your own. The Apple II, which was also designed by Wozniak, launched just a year later in 1977 and was a far more commercially successful product. It was a self-contained system with a plastic case and keyboard, but it was the VisiCalc spreadsheet app that ran on the Apple II that helped make it a must-have for businesses and business users alike. Apple released the Apple III in 1980. It was the first computer that Wozniak didn't design and suffered a litany of problems. Heating issues caused the solder holding parts of the motherboard together to melt, and for chips to pop out of their sockets. To get them back in place, Apple told users to pick up the system and slam it on a desk. If not for the Apple II's popularity, Apple could have been in serious trouble. In a 1985 interview with Playboy, Jobs said the losses from the Apple III were incalculable. Apple also filed its IPO in December 1980 at a price of $22 per share. The stock has split 4 times since then. Following the Apple III, Apple began work on the Lisa and Macintosh. Both systems were meant to run graphical user interfaces, or GUIs. GUIs are the collections of windowed programs, icons, and folders we depend on to use computers to this day. Prior to the advent of the GUI, users would interact with their computers using programmable languages. The Lisa debuted in 1983, but failed due to its $10,000 price tag. Still, it was the first consumer computer to come with a mouse and, more importantly, a GUI. The Macintosh, on the other hand, proved incredibly successful for Apple. It was the first mass-market, consumer-priced computer and used a GUI and mouse like the Lisa. At $2,495, the Macintosh still wasn't cheap, but it was far from the $10,000 Lisa. Neither Jobs nor Wozniak were Apple's CEO when the company started. Its first CEO was Michael Scott, who came over from National Semiconductor in 1977. Mike Markula, an early investor and Apple's third employee, took over from Scott in 1981 and headed the company until 1983. It was in 1983 that Jobs famously pitched then Pepsi CEO John Sculley to be Apple's next CEO by asking him whether he wanted to sell sugared water the rest of his life or change the world. Sculley and Jobs initially hit it off, but their relationship soon soured, and in 1985, Jobs planned to oust Sculley as the head of Apple in a coup. The move, however, backfired, and Apple's board ended up moving Jobs into the role of chairman, which was far from the hands-on position Jobs wanted. He subsequently left the company and founded the computer company Next. Meanwhile, in 1985, Wozniak, frustrated with no longer being needed as the engineer at the company he helped found, announced that he would leave Apple to start up a home video production company. At the time, Wozniak said he felt Apple had been going in the wrong direction for several years. He sold much of his stock on the way out. Sculley led Apple from 1983 through 1993 and took the company from an annual revenue of $569 million to $8.3 billion. But internal strife, moving Apple computers to the PowerPC chips instead of Intel processors, and the launch and failure of the Newton PDA led Apple's board to oust Sculley from his position as CEO. Apple then turned the reins over to Michael Spindler. During his tenure, which lasted until 1996, Spindler fought off proposals seeking to split Apple into separate companies for hardware and software. Unfortunately, he also oversaw Apple falling behind in the PC price wars, which saw the company eventually license its OS 7 operating system to other computer manufacturers, creating a handful of Mac clones. Those systems, however, ended up cutting into Apple's bottom line. In 1996, Apple named Gil Amelio CEO. His time in the driver's seat lasted just a year, but while there, he purchased Next Computers from Steve Jobs for $400 million to use their operating system in Apple's computers. Naturally, part of the deal included bringing Jobs on as an advisor. The next year, Amelio was out, and Jobs was named interim CEO of Apple. Back at the company he helped found, Jobs went to work cutting various products and projects to make Apple as trim as possible with the goal of returning the company to profitability. Jobs went on to lead Apple during a period of major growth with the introduction of the colorful iMac all-in-one computer, Mac OS X, the iPod, and iTunes. The company's crown jewel, though, was the iPhone, which Jobs unveiled in 2007. The next year, Jobs announced the App Store and later launched the iPad. Jobs also oversaw the launch of the MacBook Air, which would change how laptops and computers were designed and built for years. Jobs, however, also battled pancreatic cancer later in his tenure, and at times had to hand the company over to Tim Cook while seeking treatment. When Jobs passed away from the disease in 2011, Tim Cook took over as CEO. Apple's iPhone 5 was the last device that Steve Jobs was immediately involved in working on. Since then, Tim Cook and company have been running the show. In that time, Apple has released the iPad Pro, new desktops and laptops, more than 10 additional models of iPhones, the Apple Watch, and AirPods. The company hasn't been without its controversies in the intervening years, though. There was Bendgate, where the new Plus model iPhone 6 was said to bend in people's pockets, the time the company put U2 on everyone's iPhone, and performance throttling issues. Still, the iPhone drove the majority of Apple's growth, cementing it as the biggest comeback story in business history. That was further solidified on August 2nd when Apple's market valuation officially crossed the $1 trillion mark. From there, it's any guess where the company will go, but chances are it's up. In the years since its founding, Apple helped launch the computer revolution, oversaw the explosion of digital music, and ushered in the smartphone age. In its wake, it's left behind lesser competitors that simply couldn't match its products or staying power. Not too bad for a company that started in a garage.